Welcome, Josie, to People Do Fun Jobs.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell me the story, Josie, of the impact that the image of the 3-year-old Syrian boy, Alan Kurdi, had on you and on Choose Love.
So we had started fundraising about a week before that image, and we were seeing all of these images on the news of, so many people crammed into little dinghies, small boats crossing the ocean, of people living in, forests, crossing borders, packed into trains. And so we were already having a big response from people who wanted to step up and wanted to help. It had been in the news for a few months. But when that image was on the front page of all of the newspapers, I just think, I always say it like it sparked an explosion of compassion in public consciousness that I really do believe is the reason that so many civil society organizations exist today, including Choose Love. So after that awful, devastating tragedy and that image that I think, seeing his little shoes and seeing how small he was and the kind of peaceful lifelessness in his body. And then as people started to learn about his family and their story, I think it just made people say, if not now, then when? And so overnight, we suddenly, the number of donations on our fundraising page just exponentially went up. We had started an Amazon wish list. We got 7,000 packages delivered the very next day. That happened every day for 5 weeks. And I think just in that moment, people wanted to volunteer. They wanted to do whatever they could. And it was enough to just post something on Facebook. It was like, no, we have to do something now. And
you had 6 volunteers working for you
at
that point?
We did.
And then these 7,000 packages come in the next day following the release of this image.
And we had to go on social media and say, can we find more volunteers? And I think within a few days, we had nearly 40 people coming every day. It was totally, totally crazy, but that beautiful to see what is possible when humans come together.
And what kind of people were showing up to help?
Literally people from all walks of life, all ages. I think our youngest volunteer was 15, who was just doing their GCSEs. There were grandmas, there were people who had just recovered from illness. And it also seemed like whatever skills that we needed somehow appeared. I had no experience in logistics or palletizing. I didn't even know what a pallet was. And there was an amazing guy who did logistics for prisons who came to volunteer. And so he was like, this is how we pack a pallet. This is how we need to pack a lorry. It was amazing. Proper people power.
I love proper people power. Love the alliteration. But that is incredible to see that. And I want to delve into Choose Love and all of its story. But what I find remarkable is before all of this is where you were at career-wise and the sacrifices you actually made to start Choose Love. So tell us about that and what you were doing.
So I had done anthropology at university, and I had ended up not finishing, and I'd ended up working in a bar in Camden called the Hawley Arms, which I was really lucky.
I know the Hawley Arms.
Yeah. I was lucky to be there at a time when there was the indie music scene, and that in that pub, MTV was just around the corner. Amy Winehouse went there, the Mighty Boosh, Razorlight, it was that really
I
that
know
time.
That exact area you're speaking of.
And so I was really lucky. I made a lot of friends and I got to know a lot of people, and ended up then from those connections working in telly and then working in music, and ultimately ending up with just an absolute dream job of working with Coldplay, the band.
Wow.
And I was incredibly lucky. I was living in Los Angeles. I had moved there with them, and it was the summer of 2015, and they had come home to the UK, so I had also come home. And that was when the refugee crisis happened. So in the summer of 2015, well, in the whole year, over 1 million people arrived in Europe seeking sanctuary. And it's when I saw these images that we just talked about, and said to some friends at lunch, I think we should do something to help. And could never have imagined then what would happen. And then it just, I found what I was supposed to be doing. I couldn't do anything else. So I never would have thought that I would have turned away from that career trajectory, because it was like my dream. So yeah, it's interesting how life works out.
So you must have worked quite hard to get to that point where you were, because it was Coldplay, you were part of their management team, is that right?
I was assistant to their manager and creative director.
So I mean, that's a huge a huge job and a lot of time.
Yeah.
And effort you've put to get to that point. So you must have been really bloody sure you wanted to leave that.
Yeah. No, actually, that's not true. It was there was a whole emotional process going on. But also what's interesting, I think, is that I always say this, that I learned so much in my 2.5 years there. And they were, they run a global business. They do that with a relatively small team. They're touring, they're creating, but I learned they do a lot of charity work. They're so kind to everyone. They're so thoughtful about everything. I learned so much, and I really do credit my time there with having been able to build Choose Love. It wouldn't exist had I not worked there.
Mm-hmm. And do you ever miss that past music life you were living?
Sometimes, yeah. If I'm being really honest, in the kind of time where it was working out, am I really going to do this full time? Am I really going to try and do this? One of the things I was really sad about was to not be at festivals and gigs anymore, and not be in that world. Mm-hmm. And so I had to accept, okay, that's not going to be a part of my life anymore. But then little did I know that Choose Love would grow to be what it's become. And now I find myself at gigs and events, and they're being put on in aid of Choose Love. And so that part of my life is actually still very much a part of my life and what Choose Love is, which is something I could never have imagined. But again, an interesting thing how things work out.
Totally, yeah. And I suppose that was part of the success, was all of your backgrounds coming together to create Choose Love.
Absolutely, 100%. And was so lucky to have so many connections, and not be afraid to knock on doors and basically pester people until they would help. And actually, no, that's unfair to say pester people, because people really want to help. Yes. But we were very lucky to have all of these connections.
In the early days, your charity dared to go where really no other charities did at that time. Why was it important for you and your team to do that?
So when we had raised all of the money that we had raised, and we had all of this aid and storage, I think it wasn't lost on us that people had trusted us, and they had put trust in us that this was all going to be used in the most effective way and go to where it was really needed. Mm-hmm. And so it just felt very instinctive to really follow through on that. And so we went to northern France, to the camp there, and kind of expected to find a big aid organization that we would hand everything over to. And when there wasn't one, and we saw that it was civil society that was responding, it was everyday people, it was a couple of particular small French organizations that really, really needed support, it was like a kind of no-brainer, right? This is what we have to do. People can't be living like this. And there was a naivety, I think, because we weren't from the sector. We didn't know about all the different challenges. And so it was just very organic. And I think as well, maybe this sounds weird, but didn't have anything to lose. Mm. So we're really quite willing to take risks. And at that time it felt, this was unprecedented what was happening in Europe. And so, yes, that, if there are fishermen in Greece who are rescuing people out of the ocean, well, we have to step up and do something and help them. And now with time, as the organization has grown and the organization has, we have so many different partnerships. There are organizations that rely on us. We have to be slightly more careful. And we now have learned about, the reason why certain policies exist and why some of these things that other organizations have in place exist. And so we're now trying to walk that line between still taking risks, but doing that carefully and making sure that we have some red tape, but not too much red tape.
Yeah.
But it's still
Must be
really
tough.
important to us to go to, even in Ukraine or Syria, we're making sure that we're working in the areas where the most need is.
Well, in the same way, Choose Love now supporting those on the front line in the war of Ukraine. What would you say is different about how Choose Love operate now compared to the other humanitarian organisations we have here?
So when we first started, we had an operation ourselves. So we, together with a partner organisation, but rented a warehouse. We had volunteers. We had distribution systems. We had all of these different programs. But we started to realise that was kind of the old model of aid of organisations kind of, I don't want to say parachuting in, but, turning up, setting up an operation, and then ultimately leaving. And the volunteers being people from other countries. And actually, there were already organisations in the different countries that we were working who could respond. They just needed support to do that. And over time, we've also learned that really the communities themselves, they just need the resources to be able to do what they need to do. And so we transitioned out of being an operating organisation, and what we do is fundraise, and then we identify the most effective community-based organisations and grant give to those organisations. So when the invasion of Ukraine happened, we knew that it was going to be Ukrainian organisations who would be responding, who would be evacuating people, who would be responding when bombs were being dropped and supporting people and getting them urgent medical care. It would be people in Poland who would be housing people who were arriving in Poland. And so whereas back in 2015, maybe we would have gone there ourselves and tried to set something up, we actually sent a team of 2 to the ground who started identifying who were the organizations, who were the individuals who were doing the work. And then we raised resources and got the resources to them. And that's very much what our model is now.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So you're kind of delegating, I suppose, from here.
And I think uplifting and amplifying what's already happening. And there's also something about equity as well. And we live in this incredibly privileged country that obviously is going through a lot of things itself right now, but we have the ability to raise these resources, and in a lot of the countries that we work in, people don't. And that's because of colonialism and because of history and because of all of these things. So it kind of feels like it's our responsibility to raise those funds and give them to people rather than come in and say, this is what should happen now, because actually we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So just pick you up on the point earlier, you said about going in and taking risks. Can you give me an example of the sort of risks you were taking in the early days that you wouldn't dare do now?
I think, going to work on a border, a border where there's riot police and there are, you're renting a warehouse space, you're having hundreds of volunteers a day. To be honest, we probably didn't have all of the systems that we should have had at that time. But we built the plane whilst flying it. But I think now, would I do that? Probably not. But I'm glad that we did.
Yeah. It's kind of how you have to build it from grassroots.
Yeah. And that's what I said earlier about naivety being actually an asset, because we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of big organizations did know what we were getting ourselves into, and that's why they were like, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, but did it not give you an element of bravery that actually a big established organization can't afford to have, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. And so now we're really conscious to not just become the thing that was the reason that we needed to exist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.